as a higher ed campus, we get to demonstrate and test global solutions to global challenges. I have a slide which talks about the scales of impact for which we operate. And while on the one hand, we're a campus, we see that we can test and demonstrate solutions on our campus that may have implications with our global suppliers. So we can scale those solutions globally. At the same time, we can take best practices globally, scale them down to the campus and test them. This is the ethos of MIT, and circular economy fits perfectly within that framework. As we are looking at our campus and seeing where and how can we as MIT demonstrate and test solutions that can advance a circular economy, we have sort of a three-part approach. Our first part is to say, well, where and how can we design a system that enables designing out waste and regenerating natural systems? So we look first at system design, and the design of systems on campus. Well, we have a waste collection system that most campuses have. We also have different systems for sharing materials on campus. So within this graphic, what we've done is we've said, where can we design the system differently? And we have a few examples, the waste contract being one of them. We also have within the system design then, how can we enable different choices of individuals working within the system? And then the third part is, what do we need to solve for that we may not have answers to? So the waste contract was a perfect fit because it's a system we already have, which is collecting the waste as it's ready to leave MIT. And we saw this as an opportunity to say, well, the waste contract is actually the gatekeeper to a circular economy, because if our waste hauler is incentivized to help us design out waste, well, then now the waste hauler becomes a partner in reducing waste and reducing contamination. Now, we saw the waste contract as a necessary contract that, quite frankly, we didn't think had been leveraged enough. So we saw a lot more value to drive both waste behavior, but also to drive procurement behavior. And we use the procurement process for the waste contract to try to set ourselves up for a better system overall. The journey was kind of basic. I mean, for other schools that are looking to tackle the circular economy, I would imagine most schools do have a waste hauling contract. So the steps we took was we pulled together our procurement officers, our waste managers, a few research scientists, and some students, and we did a listening tour. And we did some waste audits together. I think I've got a picture in here of a few of us doing a waste audit where we literally worked through and looked through the waste to understand what was in there, what wasn't. And there was this really funny story where we were on the loading dock taking apart the waste. And in the picture, you'll see there's this mystery box. And it was a cardboard box that was sitting on the loading dock. And no one knew how it got there or what it was doing there, but we knew it was filled with hundreds of pounds of rice. And it became this wonderful teaching moment where everyone was scratching their heads saying, now, we're trying to be really good about managing our waste, and yet hundreds of pounds of old rice shows up in a box on the loading dock, and no one could explain it. And so we had everyone involved in the chain, from procurement all the way through the building and waste management, looking at this together. No one was blaming anyone, but we used it as a learning moment to say, okay, well, how do we design this out of our system? Or actually, how do we ensure that the few hundred pounds of rice in that box has a way to get into a compost process? And so by doing this kind of listening tour of going to facilities and literally studying the waste together, we were all on the same page. We were all learning together. And therefore, when it came time to say, well, what services do we need from the market? We developed our RFP together. It was a pretty simple process because we all agreed on what was needed because we'd all studied the issue together. Universities in the higher ed sector has enormous purchasing power that I think is rarely leveraged. I don't think we in higher ed realize that we do have that kind of purchasing power. So I think one of the clear lessons was after this listening tour, it became very clear to us as an institute, these are the kinds of services that we need. And we weren't sure if the market offered those services because we had met with some different waste haulers to understand what's out there, and nothing really seemed to fit with the kind of data-driven sustainability waste contract we were looking for. But what we did was we put our RFP together and we went to market and we said, let's see how the market responds. And I think the lesson we learned was that we could actually shift the market, because what we found was that some of the traditional responses that we were expecting, well, they came back with some innovations. And a few entities came back and said, well, we can do this and this and this. We haven't tried this yet, but we'd like to. We haven't tried this yet, but we think we can do it. So by higher ed taking a lead and saying, we're willing to test and try to drive a circular economy, we need to partner with the suppliers to do this, join with us. And that attitude and that openness, I think it helped to unlock a willingness on the part of the market and the suppliers to say, boy, let's give this a shot. This is a testing ground. And what emerged was then an agreement that has more of an incentive for sustainability performance in our waste hauler. In waste, oftentimes the data is collected by haulers as a means for billing the higher ed institution or billing the client. So it's data that's really just serving as a billing technique. But as we know with the National Sword Policy, there's a standard of contamination. That's actually a key, because if we can make our material available within the standard for various recycling and reprocessing systems, well, now we're making material clean enough and available for the circular economy. If we're not hitting that standard, well, then our material isn't going to feed the circular economy. So we are, part of our partnership is developing a data collection framework that involves some technology and data that is so useful for our purposes, not just for guiding the hauler's operations. So by embedding data and technology as a core piece of our new waste hauling partnership, we're ensuring that we can start to test the collection framework to give us the data to now drive decision-making down to a building scale. Because if buildings and the occupants of the building on a campus, we have 150 buildings. So if we have 150 buildings that know how they're doing with contamination levels, they can now make changes of behavior in the building. If we don't have that at the building scale, it becomes much harder to drive down contamination. This is an industry-wide problem. It's a problem all across higher ed. The technology and systems aren't fully in place to do this, but we've got to test it out somewhere. So we want to get it going on our campus and see what's possible.